You're listening to Making Data Simple, where we make the world of data effortless, relevant, and yes, even fun.
Hey folks, welcome back to Making Data Simple. This is Al Martin here. As I always say, we love hearing from our listeners. And if you have any comments, questions, concerns, we do listen. And please send a note to almartintalksdata@gmail.com. We'll take a listen to that and most likely get back to you unless it's just a comment of some sort. Today I have two special guests, two guys that I've known for a long time. Mr. Art Kagel, who's the president and principal consultant at Ask Data Management. He's also an IBM champion and Informix expert and evangelist, Informix being the database. And then I've got Lester Knutsen. Lester is likewise an IBM champion and president and principal at Advanced DataTools Corporation. Welcome, guys. Look, we've known each other for a long time. It's great having you on the podcast. We're going to have some fun today. Welcome.
Thank you. Good to be here.
Thanks for having us, Al.
So, Art, I'll start with you, and then I'll go to Lester. Art, why don't you give us a little background and do a proper introduction that I probably butchered to start?
Well, sure. So, consultancy, my company, Ask Database Management. Basically, I do consulting around database performance primarily, mostly with Informix users, but other systems as well. And just general development and consulting.
Nice. Lester?
Hey, well, we've been an IBM partner since the 90s and an Informix partner since 93 when I started the company. Our focus is also on Informix database consulting, training, and support. We have customers around the world. I did a course. I do a lot of training. I did a course last week where I had someone in London and someone in San Francisco in the same course, doing it across time zones.
All virtual?
All virtual.
All virtual. Nice. So I know Art and Lester from my, I would say my heritage, but I'm still doing Informix today, and I continue to do Informix. These are they've earned the designation of IBM champion. On a personal note, when I think of you guys, Lester, when I think of you, I think of you sitting on a boat someplace because I know you love to scuba dive. And Art, I think of you surrounded by grandkids. Is that pretty good visual?
Often that's a pretty good visual for me, yeah.
Yeah, the boat, it's better to think of me underwater than on a boat. I probably spend more time underwater than on the boat.
Well, I'm only thinking of you on the boat right now because you've got to be talking to me. Otherwise, yeah, you'd be scuba diving right now.
That's true.
Before I jump in, Lester, I got to ask you then, you are at home, right? So you're not, I know you travel a ton. What's your favorite place that you've ever scuba dived?
Probably Indonesia in Cendrawasih Bay. And there's nothing in the world like being at 40, 50 feet and having a 40-foot whale shark come straight at you.
Did you panic?
No. Remember,
I would panic.
Whale sharks are vegetarians.
How do you know it's a whale shark?
I've learned my fish ID. That's one of the things you teach yourself, is to tell what's good and what's dangerous stuff down there.
Yeah, well, if I see if a shark comes into view, I'm going to panic. I don't care what shark it is. The ID is going to come next. But good for you if you've got the peace of mind to be able to do that. And Art, I guess no sharks for you, but it's family all the time, 24/7.
Yeah, well, right now it is. My daughter and son-in-law were living with us for about 11 months while they moved up from Maryland and found a new house nearby here. And now my son and his family are doing the same thing after they moved out. So I've gone from one group of grandkids to the next, and it's been great.
Fantastic, great. Look, let's talk. We're going to talk about databases. I know that's both your area of expertise. They've been around for a while. 50 plus years, for a long time. The focus has always been on relational, hierarchical database. In the last 10 years, we've seen the proliferation of object stores, document stores, NoSQL, columnar. I could go down the list. Why do you think that we're seeing so much change in the database industry, and why are there so many different data stores appearing?
So I think it's a matter of different tools for different problems and different data. And I think we're being very creative in inventing new tools to solve different data problems. So I really think the different types of data stores are a very positive aspect of our world.
You see it the same way, Art?
Yeah, I think I agree with that. Definitely, I'm very much in the camp of using the right tool for the right job. Um, but one of the things that I noticed looking at all of these new databases is that a lot of it is what I like to call the myth of the new, right? Everything new is better. Um, and I did in fact, I did a blog back in 2014, I guess, on that subject. And I kind of think that if you look things over, the key value stores are just like Berkeley DB and DBM databases that we had in the 70s and 80s. And GraphDB is not a whole lot different from a network database or a hierarchical database. Um, so a lot of what they're doing now that they're thinking is brand new and has been invented recently is rehashing of old ideas. And one of the things I like to keep in mind is that a lot of those old ideas were successful and had use cases, and they're still being used today. And there are similar use cases for the new databases. But there's a reason why the industry kind of settled on relational databases for most applications, is because it has the widest use case and it handles the most kind of stuff.
What do you think has been the most or the greatest advances in data stores or data management technologies in the last 5 years?
Well, I think one of the biggest ones has been SSD drives and cheaper memory. The fact that you can put a large database in memory and get to the data so much faster makes a huge difference in how you design and implement a database.
Well, essentially, not even the database itself. You're talking about the memory and essentially flash memory
Right,
that has made the change.
right.
Right, but
It's the underlying technology. It's just getting bigger, faster, cheaper.
one of the limiting factors in system performance over the years has always been whatever the current bottleneck is. For the longest time it was memory, and then as memory got faster, it was CPU, and then when the CPUs got faster, now it's storage or network. Now the networks are lightning fast, so storage is the last thing at this point. It's the current bottleneck, and SSD has done a lot to improve that.
Yeah, but Art, like you mentioned, a lot of this is rehashing of what we've seen in history or in the past.
hmm
But there's got to be some new breakthroughs. There's nothing out there that impresses you in the fundamental database technology?
I don't think so. I look at uh, columnar databases and things like that, and I say, well, that was just an inversion database. It's stuff that we used a long time ago, and it has its applications. A columnar database can answer um, complex queries that look at subsets of a logical table much faster than a row-oriented database. Um, but it's not a panacea. It fits a particular use case. So I haven't seen any one technology that's going to revolutionize how we do data altogether. You
What
know,
about you? It seems like Art, Lester. It seems like Art's not very impressed.
Let me give you another different use case.
Okay.
And I got to think about this for a minute because I was working with a university and they were collecting data from a city and basically trying to figure out noise levels in a city and how that affected people. Um, and it was very open, very very public. That doesn't fit in a relational database. Noise levels don't fit in a regular database. And so they had to come up and this is a very case of the new database technologies allowed them to do that.
So, what were the elements of the database technology that you would key on to say, look, had this been 20 years ago, they wouldn't be able to do it as efficiently as they did it today?
Oh, 20 years ago, they would have stored those in flat files on a file system someplace. Now you could have them indexed by, they used a bit of time series data types. They used a bit of geospatial data types, and they used a bit of sound. And so it's coming together of three different technologies in a new system. I think we're just beginning to see the tip of the iceberg of all these new data collection systems and new types of data that's out there. Going back to scuba diving, one of the things I would love to be able to do is take my pictures and integrate them with my depth gauge and the data sets from my dive computers, and just see, and then the geolocation of where they are. To do things like see how reefs changed over the last 20 years, how have fish stocks changed over the last 20 years. Can I do a query against my pictures and get an idea of whether fish stocks have increased or decreased in a place?
A startup in the making there, man.
Yeah.
So, hey, Lester's a little bit impressed. Come on, Art.
It's not that I'm not impressed. My issue is that the kids coming out of school today, right? They believe, or at least they seem to believe, that if it wasn't invented in the last 2 years and it's not open source, it's not useful. It's old. It's dilapidated. We don't need it anymore, right? And that's not the case. I think that I definitely think that there are use cases that are specific, as Lester says. For this particular data, you've got to have this particular kind of a database. If you have time series data, you need a time series database, or at least a database that's capable of doing time series well. It's not a relational kind of data, right? If you're trying to scrape the web, you can't put that in a relational database. No issue with that. It's got to go into something more like Hadoop, or if first on a smaller scale, Mongo, or something like that. But just because it was invented in 1980s doesn't mean it's outdated. The analogy I like to come up with, I always remember stories that my father-in-law used to tell. He came into this country after the war, and he was in Canada, contracted to the Canadian Railroad, cutting down trees to make room for the railways in northern Canada. And it reminds me that, stone axe will still cut down a tree, right? But stone axes were replaced by bronze axes, and bronze axes were replaced by steel axes, and then they came saws and chainsaws and those giant circular saws attached to a skip loader that can just take down a whole tree in 5 seconds. That doesn't mean that a hand axe is not a useful tool, right? I can't use that giant cut saw, and I don't need a chainsaw for the one sapling that I've got to cut down once a year. So you got to have the right tool for the job at hand. And a lot of the tools that we've been using for the last 20, 30, 40 years and more are still useful tools.
Yeah, but there's going to be some kids out there that are going, oh my gosh, this guy is the same guy that walked uphill both ways to school, and I'm going to use a chainsaw, and he can love and live with his old axe.
Sure.
Let me just say something on Art's side of the coin. I do think there's an element of what I see a lot of is what I call the lazy developer. And that's, I'll put it in a NoSQL database so I don't have to decide and discipline myself as to what the structure of the data will be. And it's like in the relational world where someone would say, I'll make every column a varchar so I don't have to decide how many bytes it's going to take. That's a danger that we have to watch out for in this new world, is to use these new technologies and to use them at a disservice.
Right, and conversely, the people using those new databases, right, are starting to realize that what they thought of as advantages have become disadvantages. So Hadoop gave birth to HBase, right? So you can do relational-like queries against the Hadoop database. Mongo begat Mongoose, so that you can put a structure on a semi-structured database. All right. All they're doing is backfilling and backfilling technologies that already existed. All right. Even adding transactions to MongoDB in the last two and a half years. That's a brand new technology for Mongo when all it does is something that relational databases have been doing for over 40 years. All right.
Well, now you're convincing me. I have to give you. In fact, I just had a client the other day, and I'm going to probably butcher this, but they had I don't know, they were using a varchar 32K just because they could, and it was the easiest thing to move data, so they did it, and they weren't using like hardly any of it, and it was across like 1,500 tables, and then we were having problems with the optimizer. The optimizer was assuming there was more data than there was, whatever the case may be, and it was slower than it should have been, and that became my fault.
Of course.
I don't know how it became my fault, but I mean that's kind of the scenarios that you're describing. And on top of that, let me ask you this: there is a perception out there that that the good old relational database is legacy and no longer needed. I ask, but what's your reaction to that?
Well, I think I answered it. It's definitely not. Look, getting rid of relational database, right, in the market. It's akin to saying, all right, I'll pull something out of the air. Let's boycott everything made in Israel. Well, okay, give up your cell phone because that was made in Israel, was designed in Israel, right? So you want to give up relational database? Fine. Pull your money out of the bank, put it under your mattress because the bank is using relational database. You want and you're not going to be able to buy anything online because all of those online transactions are running through a relational database. Oh, and cut up your debit cards and your credit cards because they're going to use a relational database, right?
Yeah.
And the rest of these other technologies, as much as they're touted as, oh, we need them for the web and the massive volumes of data and the massive volumes of transactions, as well as I do, the largest online sports betting company in the world uses a relational database. They process millions of transactions a second through a relational database. Tell me that's not big. Right. I have 3 clients that have databases over 30 terabytes. Tell me that's not big data.
Yeah, I don't disagree with you. I also, it does seem, interesting that you've got a lot of these purposeful database or purpose-driven databases out there, and almost every one of them are trying to expand their use cases.
Yes.
Which puts us all right back into the same boat that we originally came out of.
Yep.
I'll give you that. Any other comments from your side, Lester?
Well, I was going to say one of the keys to relational databases that the name relational doesn't handle is the logging and the transactions get committed and the guarantee that a transaction will get committed. That's not there in a lot of other technologies. And to me, that's one of the most important things about a relational database. If you have something like a bank or an airline ticket that needs a guarantee that it's going to be there, you want a relational database right now.
Yeah. So speaking of all this, and I'm sitting here thinking, is you guys are doing regular consulting, you guys are educating, and you guys are database experts, which I appreciate because I'm all about data. It's in my brand, my personal brand as well. But from your perspective, is the data storage and data management really getting easier, or is the sheer volume, velocity, variety, all the V's Are we wiping out all the benefits of the advances given the sheer amount of volume, et cetera, that we're having right now?
We're doing two things. The volume's increasing, but the technology's increasing that's allowing us to handle that. And so, yeah, it's getting more complex, but we're getting better technology to go handle that complexity.
Yeah, I agree. Moore's law applies. The more data you've got, the better we make the technologies work. The relational databases of today can process probably several hundred times the transaction rate of the databases that I first used when I got involved with relational technology in the early 80s.
Yeah, I'll give you a simple example of that. You know this, Al. We did a contest called the Fastest DBA contest, and when I first did it 15 years ago, the batch job I had took 40 hours to run. That same batch job, same data, right now on most computers will run in 5 minutes. That's what technology has done to us, and that's allowed us. I mean, I quit doing the contest because I couldn't come up with big enough data to make it interesting.
Yeah, that's interesting. So let me ask you. So summarizing this all up in terms of the concerns you're seeing, and we're probably overvaluing some of the purpose databases that are out there. I mean, they're good for what they're good at, but forgetting that there's other things.
It's not overvaluing so much as thinking they're the answer to everything, and
Right.
where they're the answer to specific things.
Right. They have specific use cases or groups of use cases, and when they're used for the correct use case, it works and they're good. And maybe there's another solution, but it's a good solution. And maybe relational could get the job done, but this is probably better, right, for that particular use case.
How many times you guys are doing consulting all over the place? Again, education, et cetera. How many times do you walk in to assist, a client and you say, "Oh my God, why are they doing this? Why are
Hmm.
they doing this?"
Almost all the time.
Happens all the time.
Well, why do you think that is? You think it's like a culture in the industry that you're on the next big thing, and then so they head down that path. It costs them more. They're promises of. I mean, it's delusional. I don't. What is it?
I think part of it is what I think some of our listeners are going to accuse me and Lester of, which is the hammer syndrome, right? As long as you've got a hammer, everything starts to look like a nail, right? So we've got relational database and we know how to use it and we're comfortable with it, so we're going to use it for everything. Well, I don't agree that that's where I'm at, but that syndrome happens to everybody at some level. Right. It is my first approach to a problem. That a data problem is a relational database. And if it's not a fit, then we move on to something else. Or if it's a fit, but not a good one, we move on to something else. Somebody who knows Hadoop is going to want to do that first. I've got a client that a large 3-letter software vendor who shall remain nameless came in and tried to tell the client that they needed to use Hadoop for a large time series application that they were already doing in another database that was working just fine, and that we had a different plan for, because that's what the salespeople were comfortable with, and that happens to developers as well. This is what I know, so this is what I'm going to try first. And it's very difficult to get people out of that mindset and to say, okay, let's examine the whole issue, the whole problem, and start from scratch, clean slate.
I know this isn't your point, but do you believe or not believe in Hadoop? I mean, what's your thoughts on Hadoop?
No, I think Hadoop is perfect for what it was designed for handling massive amounts of completely unstructured data and doing massive searches, but it requires a massive amount of hardware, right? It when they were developing the thing, it wasn't a useful idea until they'd proven that they could get it to work on 100 systems, spreading the work across 100 machines. Okay, that's a lot of hardware. If I can get the same job done on a single piece of hardware with a different database because the data isn't unstructured, then that's the solution, right? If the data is unstructured and that's the only way to churn through it, then absolutely it's the right solution.
What's the one of the selling points of Hadoop is like the high availability, the redundancy you have in Kubernetes. Although I see a lot of systems and cloud providers, go offline, etc. My question is, they just don't got it right. They haven't configured. They haven't set it up correctly. I mean, what's the gap there? Do you know?
For what? For relational
I
being
mean,
as reliable?
by definition, if you have multiple clusters, you should have redundant data or so high availability. What I'm saying is that we've got a lot of the relational databases, if you want to compare it to that have like 5.9s already. And they
Sure.
say, hey, look, I'm going to move to cloud, and I'm going to get 5.9s because I've got a backbone of Kubernetes clustering. Do you say, yeah, I get it, or do you say, no, you got a lot of configuration to do to make sure that you get back to 5.9s?
I say you've got to go ahead, Lester.
I was going to say it's not an easy answer because you can't just say I'm going to move to the cloud and everything's going to work and I can go take a nap. It's a lot of work moving to the cloud and getting the same kind of reliability that you have on a local server. Everybody I see doing something like that, I like to say it's still going to take the same kind of performance tuning. It's still going to take the same kind of monitoring. That doesn't go away. And as your data gets bigger and larger, it actually becomes more complicated.
Did you have something to add there, Art?
No, I think that's true, and I agree with that. But I also wanted to say that the relational databases, as an example, right, and the other long running database systems that have been around forever, have that redundancy that have been developed over 35 and 40 years. That you're just not going to be able. You're building this out of whole cloth in a sense, and you're relying on underlying technologies, and you're moving to the cloud, which means you're losing some control over what the hardware is and where it is, and what the backbone is, and you don't have that level of hands-on control that you do in a data center. I think it has an application. It has applications, and sometimes it's going to be the right solution, but it's not necessarily the only solution.
So, but if for those people, I mean, if you have a client that comes to you and says, "Look, I'm moving to cloud. It's the right thing to do. We're going to have cost savings, etc." But it's a mission critical application, and I've got to have 5.9s. Any suggestions you give to them? I mean, do you say, "Look, I'll stop there." Any suggestions you give to them?
Well, my first answer is it's going to take as much work and planning and preparation as if you're going to do it on premise. I don't think moving to the clouds is going to be any less work than doing it on premise to get 5.9s.
Right. The main thing you gain is you don't have that delay to move new hardware in. Right. That hardware's already there. They've got it there as long as they're doing their job as a cloud provider. So you're faster to set up. You're faster to add resources. I think that's a great thing. It's a good thing. But it's not everything. I'm going to talk to a client that needs a system that absolutely positively has to be online, and we're talking about a relational database system. Then I'm going to look at to take my favorite database, for example. Informix has 5 different kinds of replication and high availability in 3 different directions. And we can keep 5, 6, 7 nines of reliability on those systems with zero planned downtime.
But do you ever? I mean, so that's software application. By the way, when we talk 5.9s for the listeners, that's essentially how available in terms of it's a high availability, and 5.9s really translates, if I'm right, to like 5 minutes of downtime a year. That'd be planned downtime. So essentially, you should never be down on a good year.
Just to go back a few steps, you can't get that 5.9 without on the cloud or in a VM or on premise without planning and work. I think that's the bottom line. It's not a number that appears. Even with databases, it doesn't appear. It takes work to get that.
Look, I'll never forget. Lester has I was just doing a keynote, and he gave me a picture as part of a keynote on how long a database had been online. And how long had that database been online that you've given me?
I only collect them when they're over 1,000 days. And so I forget which one I gave you. I've got several. I like to collect uptimes that are over 1,000 days, which is over 3 years.
Well, I think this one, if I recall, was like something like unbelievable. I don't even know how you got this, but it was like 8 years or something. Yeah. And it, for those listening, just for transparency, it was an Informix database that had been up for 8 years. It was amazing. All right, so I want to do what I call, if you guys are game, you got to be game.
Yep.
I want to go through
take it on.
All right, I'm going to give you some questions. I'm interested in, and I'll kind of go back and forth since we have two guests today. Like, you'll start the first one, Lester, then Art, you start the next one, then Lester. We'll go back and forth with some questions I have. I just want to get, so this is my chance to finally pick your brain with a number of different things. You ready?
Yep.
Sure.
All right, Lester, what is the biggest myth in technology?
That it's going to get easier.
All right, Art, what's your answer?
That real artificial intelligence is something we can reach soon.
Will we reach it?
Maybe someday. Not anytime soon. It's always been 50 years away for the last 50 years.
All right, fair enough. And I'm going to go back and forth. I mean, there's no rhyme or reason to some of these questions. It's just what I have as interest. Art, what's your number one role model? Not related to you. Not related.
I have two role models. In my personal life, it was one of my very, very close friends who passed away about a year and a half ago, as a model for what a friend and a human being should be. And professionally, honestly, Lester is one of my role models.
What? Now, Lester, you're going to have, okay, outside of Art, Lester.
I was going to say, I can't answer that now.
All right. So, Lester, outside of Art, because we know he's your role model, who else you got?
I have worked with so many wonderful people over the years. It's just hard. I'd get in trouble if I didn't list them all. So it'd be really, really hard to do that. When you asked Art that question, I was sitting here thinking, I don't have a good answer for that real quick. There are just so many wonderful people I've worked with over the years.
All right, I'm going to answer it a different way, and I'll go back to Art. Who's the biggest influence you've had in your career?
Oh, in my career was one of my first managers who taught me what it meant to be a manager and a leader, and that the most important thing was to have your people's back.
What about you, Lester?
Well, I almost answered this for the role model. When I first moved to the DC area, I worked for a tech company that was run by an editor of a sports well, he had been an editor for a sports magazine. He knew nothing about technology. And we did Navy and Army contracting. And he was phenomenal to work with, and I've always really appreciated it. One is he taught me how important language was, which I think a lot of programmers still don't realize. How you describe what you're doing is very important. That's who would be one of my key role models too.
Okay, Lester, back to you. What's the you've been doing this a little while. I don't want to date you or anything. You got a lot of wisdom, as does Art. This is why I'm asking this question. I'm just curious. What's the craziest thing you've seen in this business?
Oh, I've seen a lot of crazy things.
Give me one, just a taste.
Doing an RM asterisk on the root directory.
So for those that are listening, I presume what that means is somebody deleted the root directory of a database.
No.
Delete the whole darn system.
Oh, you're talking about the file system?
Exactly.
Okay.
And once you start that, you can't stop it.
I was thinking, uh, anyway, I got it. All right.
I'll give you another one like that, though. This will date me. Remember back in the days of 300 baud modems?
Oh, yes.
And how you'd connect to a remote system and you get line noise that came across as a capital D's sometime. And if you go into certain tools and type DD, that means drop database.
Yes, that's what I thought you were talking about is drop database.
No, I've had support people do that. Who worked with me, dial into a remote system, get a bunch of line noise, and go D, and they can't do anything about it. It's just DD. The database gets dropped.
So what do you do in the first one? They remove their file system. You say you're going to lunch or what?
You spend the next couple of days rebuilding the system.
Ouch. I had I'm asking you these questions, but I've actually had that happen. Not to me, but a customer that I was helping more than once. Let's put it that way. All right, Art. I think I got 3 more questions.
All right.
This one's for you. The next one's for Lester. What do you do for fun, man?
What do I do for fun? I used to do skiing. I used to ski a lot until my knees gave out. And I used to bowl until I had 4 kids to raise. So at this point, not a heck of a lot. I'm just been too busy lately.
Now I'll give you the answer. It's your grandchildren because we've talked about this.
It is. It really is.
What do you think it's going to look like? I mean, do you got any of your grandchildren that are entering into the computing world?
No, my oldest is 5, going on 6.
The oldest grandchildren is 5. I thought they were older than that. So you're a young man.
No,
young man.
Yeah. No, I got a 5 down to 21 months.
Well, in any regard, what do you think the world's going to look like when they're our age?
I don't know. It looks a whole lot different than when we were their age. So it's a different world. But they'll cope. I always said the when I was doing training back in the day that the people who had the most trouble coping with the world were the people at that time who were our age or in their at the time in their 30s. Right. My parents and my grandparents, they coped with the world because it had so changed so drastically. My grandmother lived through the beginnings of flight and my parents lived through the beginnings of the space age. We grew up with that and we expected that we were going to cope and everything would be easy because after all, we grew up in the modern world. But when computers began and cell phones and everything else became so ubiquitous, our generation had the most trouble. And I think that this next generation is going to see the same thing because they're growing up again with all of this technology was new for us. And the next set of technology that comes along, I think is going to throw them for a loop.
All right, Lester. And this is the question for you. Is scuba diving your absolute passion?
Oh, I was going to say I like my grandkids too.
Well,
I was going to tell you a story. Art triggered one on the last one. About 8 years ago, my granddaughter was 2 years old, and she comes up to me and says, "Grandpa, the big iPad doesn't work." And I said, "What's a big iPad?" She points at the TV, and she goes up to the TV and tries swiping her hand across the TV and says, "It won't change channel."
See?
Oh, that's the world we live in right there, man. That's how it kind of sums it up. I'd like to even stop there, but I've got to ask you a little bit about the scuba diving. How many grandchildren you have before I do that?
I have 4.
You got both have 4?
Yeah.
No, I'm up to 6.
Oh, you're 6. You're 6.
And number 7's on the way.
Wow.
Yeah, all grandsons so far.
Oh, you're kidding.
So,
Well, what about you, Lester?
So I've got 3 granddaughters and 1 grandson. And I'll throw in a bit of scuba diving here. 2 years ago, my wife and I took our oldest granddaughter scuba diving. She swims like a fish. And that was the most amazing thing, was to get her out. She went through some training. Within an hour of training, they felt she was comfortable enough to take her in the ocean. And the most exciting thing she saw was a tarpon that was bigger than her. And it was just phenomenal to see her get all excited underwater over this fish that's bigger than her.
See, that's normal, Lester. That's what's normal. When you see a shark, you get excited. When you see a tarpon, you get excited.
Yeah. And to see a little kid do that is just like amazing.
How'd you get into scuba diving? What was your first trip like? I mean, it must have been like earth shattering.
Oh, yeah. I've always lived around some phenomenal reefs. As a kid growing up, I grew up in Malaysia and, would go diving in the ocean, snorkeling, and just loved it. I always wanted to scuba dive. And a while back, my wife and I were in Hawaii, and they had this deal, come do a Discovery Scuba thing. I took it, and they said, if you come back tomorrow, it'll be $20 cheaper. And then they said, if you come back tomorrow, it'll be $20 cheaper. So I kept coming back every day. It's like I fell in love with it as soon as I did it.
All right, I'm going to finish with one because I know you guys have bared with me for quite a while here. I'm going to throw you a softball. Usually on this podcast, we try to keep it really technology or industry oriented. But I know you're feeling on Informix. And for full disclosure, I was with Informix and came to IBM through an Informix acquisition. So I bleed Informix as well. But here's the softball question. Why do you guys love Informix so much?
For me, it just works. It is, from the first time I've started using it in 83, forget how old it is. It just works.
It just works. Sum that up pretty well. How about you, Art?
For me, it's always been that whenever I look at at something that Informix does in a particular way or does particularly well, and then I'm exposed to what a competitive system does in the same situation, I'm always surprised at how much better Informix is at A, B, and C. I'm sure there are things that Oracle or DB2 or SQL Server do better at D, E, and F. But I'm always surprised at those kinds of things. You're not going to find a site that uses another database system where 6 or 8 DBAs are running 20,000 database instances. When I was at Bloomberg and after I left, they replaced some of the Informix servers with a competitor's product. Let's put it that way. And I was managing 46 Informix servers with one assistant. That competitive system needed 25 DBAs to manage it, doing the same work.
So a total cost of ownership being...
Yeah, total cost of ownership was massively different. The Informix was the first product to let you take an archive of the system while it was live and being actively updated. That just didn't happen before Informix figured out how to do it. Everybody does it now, but Informix was first, and that amazed me. It was one of the first databases that you could alter in a table without having to pull the data out and rebuild it from scratch. Things. It was the little things like that. The fact that you can do replication in 5 different ways, and depending on what fits your needs. All those things.
And to add one more thing, I also think it's fast. I've had several clients that have tried to move off of Informix and haven't been able to because of the speed. They can't get that same speed on another database.
Right. A perfect example. A friend of mine actually lives here in the neighborhood, goes to my synagogue. He had a little company many years ago, and he ran on Informix. He was the second largest provider of loyalty cards and loyalty systems for retailers. Okay. And he ran the entire business on 2 Sun blades running Informix. One that was primary, one was an HDR secondary server, a replication server, a little Sun blade with 2 processors, and 3 disks, I think. And at some point, he and his brother decided to sell the business, and they sold it to their biggest competitor. And the competitor tried to move all of their customers onto their existing system, which was running on massive system, running a competitive database, and they could not even move one client, because moving that one client brought their system to its knees. Okay, because they were processing on this tiny little box something on the order of 4 times the transactions that the competitor was processing on their big box. So that's Informix.
Look, I love your guys' passion. As you know, that's one reason or a lot of reasons I brought you on. So thank you guys for taking the time today to share some of your wisdom. I consider you not only experts, but friends. I promise I have your back. I know you always have my back. But again, thanks for being here. And anything left unsaid that we didn't hit?
I was just going to say thank you for inviting us and being on. This is always a pleasure.
My pleasure. Absolutely my pleasure. By the way, we'll get all your contact information in the show notes for people to reference. If anyone's out there, if you're listening right now, please always give us feedback. As I started the show with almartintalksdata@gmail.com. We like to hear from you, and always rate us if you can. We learn from the ratings just as well. Thank you so much, and talk to you next time.
Thanks for listening to the Making Data Simple podcast, where we make data fun. Be sure to visit IBMBigDataHub.com/podcast to access the show notes and uncover even more great episodes. Remember, the views expressed here are those of the host and its guests, and do not necessarily represent the views of IBM. Until next time, over and out.